Hello guys and welcome back. It has been a minute, hasn't it? If you are new around here, I cover mostly Australian cases, and today I'm going to be telling you about a solved case that has been described as one of Australia's most horrific cases, and honestly it was a complicated one to research. There will be a little bit of jumping back and forth in the timeline of events, but hopefully I've made it relatively easy to follow. This is also another one of those cases with a lot of conflicting information. And I mean a lot. Of course, I have done my best to gather research that I believe to be the most accurate based on my resources, which as always are linked down below. And a warning, this video does contain disturbing details involving a child. And one more thing, like on the last video, I'm going to leave links down below where you can learn about the Black Lives Matter movement and learn where and how to support the Black community, including some Australian specific links. Although this matter is slowly fading from the media spotlight and from our timelines, let's still remember to continue to educate ourselves and others and call out racism. Acknowledge your privilege as well, and remember to use that privilege to speak up and make a difference beyond your timeline. And remain aware of what's happening around you. We're at the point where we can no longer remain silent. It's not enough to just be anti-racist. And by speaking up, we can make a difference. And having said all of that, let's get into today's solved case. So we're heading back to 2015 on July the 14th, which was a Tuesday. A male motorist was driving down the Kurunda Highway located near South Australia when he decided to pull over on the side of the road for a quick toilet break in the very small town of Wynarka. And I mean small. According to a 2016 Australian census, Wynarka had a population of 76, not 7,600 or 1,000, 76 period. So after this man finished up his business, he spotted an abandoned, dirty grey, old beaten up suitcase on the side of the road. And near the suitcase lay some dirty, tattered children's clothing scattered about. The man decided to take a quick look in the suitcase out of sheer curiosity, and after a quick rummage about, he came across what appeared to be human skeletal remains. The police were called and quickly established the skeletal remains belonged to that of a young female child. In the suitcase, they also found more children's clothing and a distinctive handmade quilt. Although the quilt was old and tattered, some of the patchwork could still be made out, and investigators believed that this may be the key to identifying this little Jane Doe, whom was nicknamed the Belanglo Angel. Police made a public appeal for information in an effort to identify the mystery child, showing the public images of this style of suitcase found, the quilt, and the clothing found with the remains. The media, who dubbed this case the child in suitcase or the toddler in suitcase case, speculated as to who this little child may be. The names William Tyrrell, who had disappeared less than a year before the suitcase was found, and Maddie McCann were thrown about, but as it would turn out, the remains were that of a young girl who had never even been reported missing. Upon examination, they determined the mystery child was between the age of 2 and 4 and was thought to be born between 2005 and 2006. Meaning she had been deceased for several years at this point. But despite this, the young girl didn't show up on any missing persons databases. It was also determined that the suitcase had been sitting on the side of the highway for a number of years, but had only been noticed by passers-by in the months leading up to the discovery of the remains. And another strange incident reported to the police was the sighting of a well-dressed man who nobody recognised arriving into Wynarka several months earlier with a suitcase similar to the one discovered. In any other town or city, this man would not have been noticed at all. But in a small town like Wynarka, he stood out like a sore thumb and was noticed by several people. Although the cause of her death could not be determined, the child had been found with cloth stuffed in her mouth and duct tape covering it, so asphyxiation was presumed as the cause of her death. And in a statement from the task force handling her case, the young girl had suffered a violent death under terrible circumstances. More than 1,200 calls came into Crime Stoppers over the following weeks and months with information on the child in Suitcase. And on October the 6th, a call came through that claimed to recognise the distinctive patchwork quilt as being handmade by the child's grandmother, Colleen Povey, who had passed away of breast cancer back in 2012. A woman named Tanya Weber was from Alice Springs and identified the mystery girl as possibly being khandalyce Kiara Pierce, the daughter of a friend from her past named Karlie Jade Pearce-Stevenson. However, Tanya had not seen Karlie nor khandalyce in around 7 years, when the pair up and left Alice Springs fairly suddenly. In fact, no one had physically seen Karlie or khandalyce since late 2008, although she had been in occasional contact with her family. Khandalyce, or Candles as she was affectionately called, was a blonde-haired, cherub-faced little girl who had been 2 years old when she was last seen. Tanya gave investigators a photo of Khandalyce clutching a quilt that appeared to be identical to the handmade quilt found with the unidentified remains. Taking stored blood that had been taken from Khandalyce just after she was born, as part of a routine screening that all newborns have here in Australia, they were able to positively identify the human remains as being those of Khandalyce Pierce. So with Khandalyce found and identified, the question remained: where was her mother, Karlie? It turned out Karlie's mother, Colleen, had actually reported her and Khandalyce missing back in 2009. But after the police saw activity on Karlie's bank card and a mobile phone, they concluded that she wasn't a missing person, but simply did not want to be found. But I'll get into this point a little bit later. As part of the investigation, a sample of Khandalyce's DNA was sent to a forensics lab in New South Wales, which would eventually reveal that she shared a familial match to a Jane Doe that had been found in the infamous Belanglo State Forest 5 years earlier. And thus another Jane Doe case was solved. The mystery girl, dubbed the Angel of Belanglo, turned out to be Khandalyce's mother, 20-year-old Karlie Pearce-Stevenson. The mother and daughter were found 1,100 kilometres apart, or 680 miles. But with one mystery solved, a whole new mystery developed. What had happened to the young mother-daughter duo? So now let's head back 5 years earlier to 2010, when Karlie's remains were found in the Belanglo State Forest. And this is actually the reason I chose to cover this case. This was the portion of it that I actually remembered as being reported in the media very clearly, the Angel of Belanglo mystery. It was a case I really didn't have much recollection of being solved, which is why I decided to delve into it. But I do remember the angelic t-shirt splashed across the media and the sketch of Jane Doe that went along with it. You'll have to let me know down below if you're in Australia, or even if you're not, if you remember the Angel of Belanglo mystery. I feel like that was a huge Jane Doe case years ago, and then people kind of forgot about it. Let me know in the comments below. So the Angel of Belanglo mystery kind of went on for several years until the media kind of forgot about it, and as I said, so did I. So let's go back to that time period. On the 29th of August 2010, which was a Sunday, a few trail bike riders were biking through the Belanglo State Forest, located in New South Wales, when they came across human skeletal remains scattered behind a log in dense bushland. Near the remains were various items of clothing. The trail bike riders had taken this same path many times before, but they had never noticed any human remains. And the thing with the Belanglo forest is, if you see a bone in that forest, if you notice anything suspicious, chances are you're going to report it because of what this forest is famous for. So it's likely that these bones had never been seen by anybody until this day. Now, I did read a few explanations for this. The first was that there had been some controlled burning going on in the area possibly uncovering the remains. And the second theory was that the remains had once been partially buried, but over time began to reveal themselves. Which is true if either, I don't know. But anyway, now if Belanglo rings a bell to you, that's because it's the forest connected with one of Australia's worst serial killers, Ivan Milat. Also known as the backpacker killer, Milat's victims' remains, 7 in total, were found scattered throughout the forest and discovered in the early 90s, although some believe he had many more victims, and some even believe he did not work alone, or was simply a scapegoat for another Milat sibling. But I digress. I do have a whole video on the Milat case if you are interested and want to deep dive into it. I'll link that down below or in the eye above if I remember, which I will not. So despite the Angel of Belanglo remains being found in the forest in 2010, they were initially thought to be possibly connected to Milat, even though it had been a very long time since Milat's last victim was discovered. So back when Milat's case was happening, the Belanglo forest was thoroughly searched, but it's a pretty large area, about 3,800 hectares, so there were areas missed, of course. And as it turned out, where Karlie's remains were found was just on the outskirts of where the perimeter ended. So it was entirely possible at the time that this was another Milat victim. Plus, it did have some of the Milat trademarks, if you will, like leaving the body out in the open. However, where Karlie was found in the forest was not typical of where Milat killed or left all of his victims. And Ivan Milat himself even commented on the discovery, saying, "No, it wasn't me." Well, that's not a direct quote, but you get the idea. Although, to be fair, any comment he made wouldn't hold much value anyway, considering he maintained his innocence right up until his passing last year. So anyway, it was eventually established through forensic examination that the remains had been deceased long after Milat was jailed, way back in 1996. A few other details they had about the remains were that the remains were that of a female, and she was thought to be between the age of 13 to 25, around 150 to 160 centimetres tall, or around 4'9" to 5'2", and could have been lying in the Belanglo forest anywhere between 6 months and 10 years. Her injuries included blunt force trauma to her torso and fractures to her ribs. A public appeal for information was released, along with a sketch of the white angelic t-shirt found with the remains, which is how she earned her nickname, the Angel of Belanglo. The t-shirt, a size 10, was found to be on sale in Australia from the brand Chain Reaction in around 2003. A sketch was also released by a facial anthropologist, who is someone that examines a person's skull structure, I guess, and determines what they would have looked like when they were alive. And may I add in here, and I'll pop images side by side, the sketch was bloody accurate to what Karlie looked like in life. I'm honestly shocked that nobody who saw this image and knew Karlie didn't connect the two, because the sketch looked so much like her. They also attempted to identify Angel using dental records and inquiring with missing persons units across Australia, but had no luck. Of course, Karlie had been taken off the missing persons database by this point, which is why no matches ever came up. And it was even theorised at some point that Angel had been a European backpacker, which is why nobody recognised her and why she wasn't coming up as a missing person in Australia. This really was one of those Jane Doe cases that investigators thought was going to be pretty easy to solve. A pretty young girl, surely someone out there knew her or missed her. But with no breakthroughs in her identity, the case went cold and remained a Jane Doe case for the next 5 years. The remains of both Karlie and Khandalyce were returned to Alice Springs in December of 2015 to finally be reunited and laid to rest. Lying side by side, sharing a white coffin, their headstone read, "In our hearts and each other's arms, forever." But before we continue with what happened, As I always like to do, I want to tell you a bit about the victims, Karlie and Khandalyce. Karlie was born in Alice Springs, Northern Territory in 1988. Her mother was Colleen and she was raised by her stepfather, Scott. She also had a brother named Luke and she attended Breitling Primary School and Alice Springs High School, where she enjoyed playing netball and earned herself the nickname Mouse because she was small and fast. At 18 years old, Karlie found out she was pregnant, and on June the 19th, 2006, Karlie gave birth to a sweet baby girl that she named Khandalyce Kiara Pierce. The pregnancy had been the result of a one-night stand, and the father didn't want anything to do with them, which was actually just fine by Karlie. Because although she was young, she was incredibly excited at the prospect of being a mother and was lucky enough to have incredible support from her family. However, Karlie was still a pretty typical teen. She liked to go out and have fun and have a good time with friends, but everyone that knew her described her as a loving and responsible mother. For a brief period of time before her disappearance, I believe Karlie lived with her grandmother and then a boyfriend before deciding to leave Alice Springs. So let's discuss the pair's disappearance. In November of 2008, after what some sources said was a disagreement with her mother, 20-year-old Karlie left Alice Springs with her daughter by car. Again, sources seem to be all over the place as to why she left and where she went. A few sources said she was in search of work, and others said that she just wanted to get out of her small town and see the rest of the country. The mother and daughter duo weren't travelling alone, however. They were travelling with Karlie's relatively new and much older boyfriend, 34-year-old Daniel James Holden. Karlie's mother Colleen had actually offered to look after Khandalyce while she went away with Daniel on their trip, as Colleen had a pretty uneasy feeling about the whole situation. But Karlie declined the offer. 1 week into her road trip, Karlie phoned her friend Tanya Weber, whom had been the one to identify Khandalyce, and told her she thought she'd made a mistake in leaving. However, by the end of the call, Tanya says Karlie was back to her usual bubbly self. So let's talk just a little bit more about Daniel Holden and how he met Karlie. So Karlie began seeing Holden in late 2008 after he left his former partner, Hazel Passmore. From what I read, Karlie and Daniel were barely an item when they left for their road trip, but soon after were calling themselves a couple. Karlie had actually been friends with Daniel and Hazel when they were a couple, as Hazel had 3 young children and of course Karlie had a young child, so they had that common ground. But this was, of course, before Karlie and Daniel started seeing each other. Friends and family of Karlie's were not too keen on this new older boyfriend, however. He was a strange character, to say the least, and was heavily into the world of taking and dealing drugs, frequently doing drug runs to earn cash on the side. He also managed to drag Karlie into the world of drug taking for a short period of time, although it seems that not much is really known about exactly how involved she was. In September of 2008, before he was dating Karlie, Holden was driving himself, Hazel and her 3 children when he crashed the car at high speed, flipping it over several times. Holden says he swerved to avoid 2 kangaroos, but methamphetamine was found in his system, which he claimed he'd actually taken at a party several days earlier and was not affected by anything at the time of the crash. Holden escaped the crash relatively unscathed, just a few cuts and bruises. But tragically, it killed 2 of Hazel's 3 children and left Hazel in a coma for over 2 weeks. When Hazel woke up, she discovered that not only had she lost 2 of her children, but her leg had been amputated and she would be in a wheelchair for the rest of her life. And to top it off, her boyfriend, Daniel Holden, had left her during this awful time to be with Karlie. And Holden was never charged with anything relating to this crash, if you were wondering. It was very shortly after this event that Daniel, Karlie and Khandalyce left Alice Springs. So the trio's first stop after leaving home was Adelaide, South Australia, followed by Canberra in the ACT, or the Australian Capital Territory, where they stayed with Holden's cousin Christine for a few weeks. However, the couple were not exactly getting along during this time, and on Monday, December 15, Karlie and Daniel hopped in their car without Khandalyce and went for a drive. They drove all the way to the Belanglo State Forest in New South Wales from where they were staying, which was a suburb called Charnwood. According to Google Maps, it's about a 2-hour drive between Charnwood and Belanglo. When Daniel Holden returned to his cousin's house in Canberra, he was alone. Holden told his cousin he and Karlie got into a fight and she asked to be dropped off at a bus stop, although his cousin was pretty sus as to why Karlie would leave her own daughter behind. So soon after dropping off Karlie at a bus stop, Holden traded Karlie's car in for a different car, and on December the 19th, 4 days after Karlie left, Holden departed Canberra by car with Khandalyce, telling his cousin he was dropping candles back at her grandmother's house in South Australia. Records show that after leaving his cousin's house, Holden checked in to a motel inn with Khandalyce for around 2 hours and also a local Woolworths to purchase some garbage bags, duct tape and some multi-purpose wipes. 1 day later, Holden was back at his ex-girlfriend's Hazel Passmore's house. On the 4th of September 2009, almost 1 year after they left Alice Springs, Karlie and Khandalyce were reported missing by Karlie's mother Colleen and Karlie's friend Tanya Weber. Police reached out to Karlie's boyfriend Daniel Holden, who told investigators he was no longer travelling with the pair and had not kept in touch with them, but he did know that she was now seeing someone else in Queensland. In fact, as it turned out, Holden had gotten back together with his former girlfriend Hazel Passmore, despite the heartbreak he had caused her. Passmore later stated, despite the devastation Holden caused her, him coming back into her life felt comfortable and familiar, and at a time when she was so lost and so lonely, she was happy to have him back. On October the 9th, 2009, police closed the missing persons investigation, telling Karlie's mother that Karlie and Khandalyce were safe and well but did not want family contact at that time. And as I said before, her mobile phone and bank card being active were enough proof for police to put the matter to rest, even though they had never physically seen Karlie or Khandalyce. There is also a bit of a disputed matter that Karlie apparently phoned either her family or the police after she was reported missing to tell them that she was fine and just did not want to be contacted. The police claim the family say they received this call, and Karlie's family say the police are the ones that spoke with Karlie, not them. So anyway, her family eventually accepted that Karlie had left Alice Springs and simply did not want to see them. And I assume they tried to move on with their lives. Karlie did keep some pretty minimal contact with her family via text message, often asking for money, which her family were happy to help her out with. But this stopped in around mid-2011. Her bank account was also being accessed right up until 2012 and had been used in 4 different states and territories, giving the impression that Karlie and Khandalyce were alive out there somewhere, travelling and on the move. Tragically, in 2012, Karlie's mother passed away from breast cancer. And just moments before Colleen passed away, she asked if Karlie and Khandalyce had come to see her yet. But of course, they had not. So after the remains of Karlie and Khandalyce were discovered and identified in 2015, investigators were pretty darn keen to talk to Daniel Holden, as you can imagine. Luckily, they did not have to look too far to find him. They found him sitting in jail in New South Wales, serving a 4-year sentence for assaulting a 9-year-old girl back in 2013. As it turned out, Holden had a pretty darn extensive criminal record, including several violent incidents against women, theft and drug-related charges. In December of 2015, the now 41-year-old Daniel James Holden was charged with the murder of Khandalyce Pierce and, soon after, the murder of Karlie Pearce-Stevenson. He vehemently denied any involvement in their deaths. Again, I do want to apologise if this video has been a little bit all over the place with order of events. Hopefully I've made it easy enough to follow. Let me know. With the arrest of Holden, let's discuss the killings of Karlie and Khandalyce. Karlie was killed first on or around December the 15th of 2008. She was driven to the Belanglo State Forest where she was sexually abused before being killed. He then proceeded to take degrading photos of Karlie's deceased body, images he held onto for years to come. Just sick, honestly. Days later, believed to be on December the 19th, he killed Khandalyce. It's not exactly known what happened to her or what was done with her body in between her death and her remains being found in the suitcase years later, because there was no signs of decomposition within the actual suitcase and no dirt found on the bones, as if she had been buried for a period of time. It's also not known if the suitcase had actually been on the side of the highway in Wynarka all of those years and had just somehow remained unnoticed. The mystery of the unidentified, well-dressed man with a suitcase coming into Wynarka weeks before Khandalyce's remains were found has also never been solved. So I feel like many of you may be watching this and thinking that there is a lot of missing pieces of information in this case. Well, let me fill in a few of those blanks for you. As you may have guessed, for several years after Karlie's passing, Holden continued to use Karlie's phone and bank card, basically assuming her identity to keep up the illusion of her being alive. He even had the nerve to ask Karlie's dying mother for money for a plane ticket back home, money that the family surely could not spare at the time. But they really would have done anything to see Karlie and Khandalyce again. So they did transfer her, or who they thought was her, this money. In total, Holden stole more than $70,000, although some reports do say up to $90,000, from Karlie over a 4-year period. When homes that Holden had stayed in over the years were raided by police, they found several items belonging to Karlie, such as Medicare cards, bank cards, and a driver's license, and Khandalyce's birth certificate. They also found notebooks filled with sick fantasies involving young women and children, some of it in Holden's handwriting and some of it in his girlfriend Hazel Passmore's handwriting. An SD card was also confiscated that held on it disturbing images of children, photos of Karlie wearing the angelic t-shirt on the morning she was killed, and the degrading photos of Karlie that Holden took just after she was killed. The SD card was actually in the possession of a relative of either Holden or Hazel, I'm not exactly sure which, that had been given the SD card to look after by Hazel, who asked the relative to take it and look after it in case anything were to happen to her. And going back to a bit more about Hazel Passmore, she told police that she confronted Daniel about her suspicions that he was having an affair right after he came back to be with her, which is when Holden told her what he had done to Karlie and Khandalyce. Hazel said she wasn't really sure if he was telling the truth until after she saw the images on the SD card. She also took part in Holden's fraudulent activity by pretending to be Karlie so she and Holden could claim Karlie's government benefits, although she says she was forced to do this by Holden and had not wanted to take any part in it. To this day, Hazel Passmore has never been charged with anything relating to this case because, as a condition of her confessing everything that she knew to the police, she could not be arrested or charged with fraud. 1 week before the trial was to commence, Holden pleaded guilty, But on sentencing day, he made a last-ditch effort to interrupt the trial and change his plea back to not guilty, claiming he had not understood what he was pleading guilty to. The judge denied his request and he was sentenced to 2 life terms in prison. The motivation behind his crimes were put down to being a mix of financial gain and sexual gratification. And that does conclude today's case. Thank you so much for being here and for listening to Karlie and khandalyce's story. And don't forget to check out the links down below. Like, comment, subscribe, share, all that stuff. And until next time, stay vigilant, stay safe, and I will see you soon. Bye guys.